Good evening and welcome to Schools Forum. In line with government guidance that everyone should stay at home as much as possible, this meeting is being held via Microsoft Teams through its live conferencing. And all the forum members, council officers and the parties who wish to participate in this hearing are joining from remote locations. The event is also being live streamed and members of the public and the media are welcome to follow the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions that are taking place. As this is a virtual meeting, I would like to run through some housekeeping for all participants. Can all parties participating ensure they remain on mute unless they are called to speak? When you do speak, please feel free to put your camera on if you would like. If you do not wish to speak at a certain point, I will be monitoring the chat box, so please type your name and a question into that box. I would now like to introduce myself and the fellow committee members. My name is Andrew O'Neill. I'm the head teacher of All Saints Catholic College and I will be chairing this committee. I'm now going to run through each member individually and I'm going to ask them to turn on their cameras and the microphones to introduce themselves. So beginning with primary school head teachers, Jagdeep Birdie from Colville. Jagdeep.
I'm here, thank you.
Katie Blackler from Avondale Park. From St Thomas's, Sarah Bouette.
Yes, I'm here representing St Thomas's and also St Clement and St James primary schools.
Hi Sarah. From Thomas Jones, David Sellens.
Yes, I'm here.
And from primary school governor sector, from Avondale Park, Peter Bassett. From Park Walk, Alison Mould.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Welcome to Alison to her first meeting at the forum. From Oxford Gardens, Chris Blewett.
Yes, I'm here, and my apologies. I don't know how to change my name, so I'm showing up as Chris Morgan. My apologies for that. I can do it on Zoom, but I can't do it on this. So I'm Chair of Governors at Oxford Gardens. Good evening, everybody.
No problem, Chris. From representatives from the secondary schools, from St Thomas More Language College, Kevin Jackson.
Hi, yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Amanda Sayers, the Chair of Governors at All Saints Catholic College.
Yes, present.
From the secondary academies, David Benson from Kensington Aldridge, or I think we might have Lawrence.
Lawrence, I'm here replacing David Benson.
From the Cardinal Vaughan Memorial School, Stephen Keogh.
Yes, present.
From Holland Park School, Shamsa Rahman. In terms of special schools, do we have Jeanette Steele from Chelsea Community Hospital School? From the nursery school, Maria Elena Arana.
Yes, I am here. Maria Elena Arana from Chelsea Open Air Nursery School.
Good evening, Maria. From the TBAP Latimer AP, do we have Racine Butt? From non-schools, we move on to councillors of the Royal Borough. Councillor Atkinson.
He certainly is trying to get on. He's upstairs and I'm down.
Okay, thank you. Do we have Councillor Aretti?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Good evening. Councillor Evans?
I'm here. I'm sorry, my audio is very good.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Evans. From the PVI Forum, Kitty Mason?
Yes, I'm here and I'd like to speak later. I've put a note.
Okay, thank you, Kitty. If we then move on to apologies for absence, I've had one apology this afternoon, and that was from Kathleen Williams, who has recently had a family bereavement. So we send our deepest condolences to Kathleen. Moving on to A2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Do any of the members have any declarations to make? Okay, thank you. Moving on to A3. Item A3 is the confirmation of the chair of the RBKC Schools Forum. Can all members confirm in line with Fran's email from last week? You can put a hands up like Amanda said has just done. Okay, this afternoon, just to let members know, Kathleen Williams stepped down as the Vice Chair of Schools Forum, and as a result there is a vacancy for Vice Chair. It's my proposal, given the circumstances around the appointment of a new chair and myself, that we wait for the next meeting and allow time for forum members to consider who they would like to nominate for that position. And much in line with this meeting, we make those nominations in the run-up to the next meeting. Given that I'm a secondary head teacher, it's my proposal that we look at either a primary head teacher or a primary governor to be nominated potentially into that role, so that we have a good balance across the forum and views across the forum on those matters. Are there any views from forum members on this? Any views from officers on this? Okay.
Andrew, if I can,
yes, Andrew.
if I can, I'd support that proposal. I think with the challenges that we're going to be facing, before I come on to the ISOS report, I think it'll be really important to get that balance across there between the vice chair and the chair. It will really make what is still, I see, one of the strongest schools forums in the country even stronger to take on board some of the challenges we're going to face.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. Also, just in relation to the outgoing chair, Simon Blanchflower, I do feel that at the end of our last meeting in June, there was almost a little bit of confusion at the end of the meeting and throughout the meeting. It was the first time we'd done it on Teams. But it didn't feel like we gave a proper send-off for Simon, and also for the huge amount of work that he's put into Forum and as a chair of governors of Thomas Jones over many years. So it's my proposal that we, as a forum, we send a card and a gift to Simon. Forum members in agreement with that, and if there is a member, an officer of the council who would like to undertake sorting that out and reporting back to us, that would be fantastic. Andrew, is that something that you or Anita could do?
Yeah, I can take that forward. It was just, I fully agree. I think it was left with just me making some comments at the end of the forum because a number of people couldn't speak or because they were muted. So, I think we'd really welcome that fantastic sort of chairing that's led us through the forum. So I'm happy to pull that together.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, moving on to item A4, minutes of the meeting held on 10th of June. Are there any comments on any aspects of the minutes that are there?
Thanks, Stephen. I'll correct that in the minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Okay, the only comment I have is relating to an action in regards to SEN. The finance element of the new SEN system will be introduced as soon as possible so that forecasts can be based on accurate and up-to-date pupil and cost data. Has this happened, Anita?
Andrew, thank you for raising that. I was proposing to cover that in the high needs forecast paper, if that's okay.
Okay, that sounds completely sensible. So is it Forum's wish that these are assigned as a correct record? Okay, lots of nods of heads and hands up, so we will accept those minutes. So we move on to item A5, which is the ISOS report. This is going to be of particular interest to Forum, particularly in regards to the patterns that we've seen in terms of pupil mobility over the last few years, particularly in relation to lowering birth rates and numbers coming in, particularly at primary schools where we've seen fall in numbers. So, Andrew, I believe we're going to hand over to you to lead us through this report.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Really helpful introduction. So I just want to take us briefly through the report. And just before I start, just thank everyone who was part of the workshops and pulling this together. We gathered such a rich amount of detail as part of that review, which enables us to have a sort of a full detailed understanding around sort of pupil projections and some of the issues that are facing schools. I think one of the key aspirations of pulling the report together and using ISOS to do the work is to have a really transparent, open conversation about what the challenges will be and some of the opportunities we need to explore for the future configuration of the schools across the borough and how we use the current schools estate. We're all aware that we've seen a decline in falling pupil numbers. That's evidenced differently in different parts of the borough and different sorts of challenges. But I think it's really important now that we look at previously where we've done expansions to schools, where we've made changes to schools, where we've reviewed the schools estate, that we do this with a medium-term view whilst sort of fully acknowledging some of the challenges that are going to come through from the school. So there's a lot of sort of data in the report. There's a lot of sort of findings that look at sort of the birth trend data and some of the property data. And I think what we have now got is a really strong local data set. We're not as reliant as we were on GLA projections and what were the mobility. We can now fully understand how the sort of pupils move into the borough, move out of the borough, the relationship with the independent sector, and just understanding that in a lot more detail than we previously done before. So I think it's quite a powerful piece of work. It does present a number of challenges with the sort of the pupil numbers, and when we look at the sort of the section around the sort of the deficits and the financial issues that schools are facing, some of them can definitely be drawn from that sort of fall in pupil numbers. Now that the sort of the formula is really reliant on pupil numbers as its key driver, each change in a pupil number has a dramatic effect on schools. So we've been working with both dioceses, we've been working with schools around those projection numbers and how we address some of those concerns. But I also want to sort of bring in that this isn't just completely related to the fall in pupil numbers as the sort of the financial pressures. There's also other issues with cost of living increases and the increasing pressure from SEND. So when we look at the options and the next steps, I think it's really important that we address this from not just looking at the current state and looking at the current pupil numbers. We look at a whole systems review, and that we can look at again about how we develop SEN provision within the borough and how we use our sites potentially in a different way. Just to say, just go down to sort of page 10 of the report and moving on to the next phase, and that's what we want the support of the forum tonight. We want to have some really key principles about how we address this to follow on that sort of transparent review, and maintaining, a high quality education offer is really important in developing that sustainable and resilient schools. So we want to see this as a a really sort of strong opportunity to shape the schools estate in the borough for the next sort of 10 years, and to make sure that we've got strong governance arrangements in place. Three of the sort of the key areas that came out of the review was, how do we maximise pupil numbers, and sort of like to get some sort of thoughts or comments on that area. There was a lack of expertise or a lack of support that was identified across the borough around financial planning, and that was both the information that's provided from the local authority, but also sort of relationships and information that's shared with governing bodies and through the sort of the bursars network, and how we can sort of support the training. And the last element is really reducing that surplus capacity in the medium term, and then how we develop that with the use of a sort of a strong risk indicator set about planning for the next phase. And then the last part of the report is to put the governance arrangements in place and do the work around those sort of three areas. I'll probably stop there now and just sort of take comments, and then come back later once we've took on those comments about outlining the plans for the next stage. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. That was a really good overview of what is actually an incredibly detailed report. So if I open this out to members of the forum for discussion, Kitty, I'll start with you, because you acknowledged very early on that you wanted to make a comment about this particular paper. If I go to you first, Kitty. Kitty, your mic is muted.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Good. The National Day Nurseries Association said that that across the board, nurseries, 71% of nurseries are expecting to make a loss because of COVID. The borough relies quite heavily on its PVI sector, and it's suffered particularly badly with the falling roles that have resulted from COVID, from all the different reasons, that people being made redundant, people moving away, people not arriving, or just feeling uncertain about leaving their children when they're not statutorily obliged to. So I'm concerned that we should consider how to support our sector. And I know that the government talked about discretionary funding that it gave to local authorities. I just know that, having done some research around colleagues in the nurseries in both north and south of the borough, none of them have lost less than 10 children. And in terms of percentages, some of them have one was 65% down and another was 60% down in terms of their numbers, where they only had 4 children instead of 13 instead of 44. Then really there are nurseries having a hard time because of where they're located. So I think we really need to consider how to support what has been a high quality and important feeder for our primary schools. Both the private and the state sector receive all our children. So,
thank you, Kitty. Andrew, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think, Kitty, whilst there's some really sort of valid points just within there about that sort of the feeder, definitely through to the maintained sector, and has a major impact on the good learning development and the results where it may be better to pick that up under the early years paper, if that's okay. This one's more around the review of ISOS, but I will definitely be in a position to respond later to some of those challenges and what we know in terms of support, if that'll be okay.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. David, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, Andrew, my question, a couple of questions really. The first one is, I agree that the document's very robust. I was one of those head teachers that was interviewed and then attended the post publication of this in its early stages. I'm keen to drive this along, as I know you are. In terms of a timescale for what happens next in real terms, are we talking about January in terms of an action plan, in terms of a group working, a much smaller group than Forum working specifically on this? So maybe that first question.
Yeah, I don't think we can wait. I think one of the drawbacks is both that myself and Andrew are called Andrew, which is always a challenge. Should have thought about that when we had the chair arrangements. So no, I don't think we can wait until that stage. One of the proposals will be to set that group, which will meet directly after half term. I think we need to get some real pace on this now, especially as we look at the October pupil count, and is there any impact on relating from COVID on a further decline in pupil numbers?
Well, I think that's really encouraging, and my peers and I will feed that back to consultative when we meet. And then the second one is very impractical. It's how do we proceed then in regard to are we going to depend upon the head teachers who are on Forum? Are we going to reach out to our peers from consultative? What's the most expedient solution in terms of ensuring we have people who are committed, they have the requisite energy, they have an interest in this, and perhaps also to some extent, hopefully, an impartiality.
Yeah, David, I was going to suggest off the bat, probably when we came to the end of this, that like Andrew said there, that we can't wait because, you know, we're coming very close to a primary admissions round coming up. We're looking at the formula later in this meeting, and we need to take action now. I think it would make sense for a member of Forum to form a part, or members of Forum to be a part of the working party, mainly because of their experience in talking about some of these issues and looking at some of these issues. And I think it needs to come not only from the consultatives of primary and secondary, I think governors as well, particularly governors who have experience in the primary sector, I think is really important. So one of the things that I was hoping to ask was who here wants to be part of that working group and help to drive that. So David, you've got your hand up. I mean, anybody else, turn your camera on so we can see you, and so that we can start to gather people who want to be a part of that. So if we just have a look now, so it's David, anybody else? Jagdeep?
Chris Blewett.
Kitty.
Amanda Sayers.
Amanda. Kitty. Chris, did I hear you as well?
Yes, Chris Blewett, thanks.
Stephen Keogh.
Peter Bassett.
We're going to end up with the whole forum, which we do need to be a little bit careful about, that we include other representatives who don't sit on this forum in itself. So I think it might be an idea if we had one primary head teacher, or actually probably two primary head teachers, a governor, and then one representative from secondary.
Andrew, if I could probably just come in, I'd probably expand, if we could just expand to two to stroke three primary head teachers, definitely two governors as well, and then sort of further representatives from the secondary sector. I think this is such a key piece of work. I'm really keen that we don't curtail it a lot, really. So I wouldn't want to shut anybody down, but I am sort of on the balance of that as well, to make it a really tight group. So so I would go probably for sort of three representatives from the primary schools, with two governors and then representatives from the secondary sector, if that's okay. It's only a suggestion. Happy to, if that isn't accepted.
I agree with that, actually. And the other point is that as the schools forum, that we're going to be bringing some scrutiny to this work. We have to have a bit of clear blue water. I'm very happy to do that role and to stand back.
Well, if I may, I'll just run through. I've got Dave and Jagdeep as primary head teacher representatives from Forum. So if we look for one more primary head, and maybe Dave and Jagdeep, if you take that to the consultative for another spot there. The first two governors I heard were Amanda and Chris, and then we have Stephen from the secondary sector. And then Kitty from the PVI. That forms what seems like a core group from Forum to then invite others from the secondary consultative and primary as well, and then anyone else, officers in particular, that seems appropriate. Does that seem like a good way of moving forward?
It does. We've got a plan. That's a plan, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fran, did you get all of those names? Because if you haven't, I've written them down. So, okay.
I think so. I'll double check.
I don't think my name's been said. Sarah, please, for primary.
Hi, Sarah.
Otherwise, we won't have church school. So it'd be really helpful if I can do that, please.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. And if we look at some of the figures, church schools are impacted quite heavily by the falling rolls. So it would make sense, particularly in the primary sector, David and Jagdeep, that's a consideration that's made when you go to your primary colleagues. Are there any other comments on the report?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
David, you were about to jump in before I cut you off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really robust report. So I would hate for anybody to think I'm being negative, but I do think, and I did make this point when we initially fed back to ISOS, and that is that the some of the detail for Forum, it would have been helpful to have had specifics in regard to these schools that have falling rolls, those that are struggling with deficit budgets. It's not there, and from we are Forum, and it would save so much time for it to be there in front of us on a spreadsheet, and it assists in the process of then being strategic in terms of rather than it having to be requested for a future Forum meeting.
Totally agree, David. I think I was really keen at this stage to be seen as a ISART, an independent report, and come for the council. That will now be circulated to all members and will be shared now by Friday of this week in advance of the first meeting. So we're not getting into that meeting cold.
Can I ask one question about that, which is just that I'm seeing that significant changes need to occur by September 2021. And that we would therefore need to start consultation in September 2020. Are we still looking at that as a realistic deadline that we're working towards? Because as these figures become known by the end of the week, we need to know what timeline we're looking at here, because it's going to be obvious at that point, isn't it?
I think there was some immediate sort of issues that need to sort of be. We were looking at some medium-term actions about sort of looking at year groups and taking those out. I don't think we can be in a situation to strategically plan that in the next sort of the 3 months. So we will be looking at the October pupil count and looking at what some of the deficit recovery plans have been put forward, but we can sort of do that in the review. I think it would be wrong to make some assumptions now to be put in place for September 2021. We do need to make some smaller changes, but I think we're in a place where we can make those changes with some discussions, whether we cap some year groups, whether we look at some interim measures. I think this is an opportunity, and I don't want to sort of seize on that we may have done before on opportunistic, a change of a head teacher or different sorts of things. This has got to be a strategic review of what the school's estate is going to look like in the borough for the next 10 years. So if we have to push deficit recovery plans for another year and we have to expand those, that's a decision that we will need to have to push and support on that basis.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Amanda, you had a question.
I did, thank you. Other people may know what this is about, but on page 12 it talks about establishing the Education Partnership Board, and what I wanted to know is how does that get established and how does it fit with work that the forum does?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on that one. One of the proposals, and it come from the work of ISOS, but it's also something that's been really established in a number of other sort of boroughs and across the country, is ensuring that we've got a sort of a lens as the local authority and bringing sort of social care and the other aspects of the council into a more strategic group. So we see the schools forum working in there, but we would see another group which is then sort of chaired by the Director of Children's Services that brings in a number of sort of cross-cutting issues, and this is looking at everything from SEND to public health spending to the development of the early help offer, and whether we can bring some of those conversations into schools. You know, unfortunately, one of the downsides of the schools forum, or the challenges of the schools forum, it has been really led from a sort of a financial lens, and that has been one of the sort of the key priorities. And this is just about getting those sort of wider synergies across the sort of the system, and especially around sort of social care. So that educational partnership wouldn't necessarily sit above the sort of the schools forum, but it would have a number of sort of different work streams feeding in. And this sort of review would want to be one of those key topics feeding in, because it is shaping, you know, the role of the sort of the schools in that sort of wider offer. Could we do something different with the schools estate around delivering services for disabled children, hosting some of the services from individual schools to maximise some of the key resources? So it's just got a wider and a different sort of remit.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Chris, over to you for a question.
There we go. Two things really. One is that I wanted to say a huge thank you, actually, because a year or so ago we were saying, "Where's the strategy? What's the plan?" And this is a plan, and it's a tribute to to the people who got this up and running. It's a huge thing. One of the things that you've addressed it in part is in relation to the timeline, because one of the things that was stated in the last meeting or the meeting before last was about, no school closures, this sort of thing. But what we've got on page 14 is very clearly about reducing surplus capacity, full gamut of approaches, consideration of capping, to amalgamations, to all through schools and school closures. And I think that really concentrates the mind, because that is a lot to achieve, particularly in relation to the potential for amalgamation, because that's a huge thing for individual schools who've got their own history. And of course, the school closures will be an incentive for us to actually move on with this. Yes, that was it really. It's about the timeline.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Andrew, is there anything you want to add to what Chris has just said?
No, I think it really does focus the mind and the challenges that we have got on there. We're not talking around sort of school closures at the moment, but I think it would be wrong not to sort of capture that in the report and set out the timescales, because we do know that this is a significant challenge. Whether this will be an increasingly difficult challenge as a result of COVID. If you look at the sort of the two charts where schools are very reliant across the borough on the mobility of children coming in from other boroughs, will that continue, and is that a different sort of lens? So I think it's really important that we capture those. And will there be a change in the independence sector? It's really interesting that we did this review in Westminster as well, and their line in terms of the independent school is the complete opposite. They've seen an increase. It's exactly the same scale, going into the independent sector where we've seen that sort of decrease. So we just need to have all these factors in there when we're looking at the review and the configuration of schools and the buildings, bringing in some of the challenges that we're seeing from the PVI sector as well around the delivery of the early years offer. So that's why I just don't want to rule anything out at this stage and make it a really transparent piece of work that we can look back in 2 to 3 years and say that this was an important change to the way the school estate and the role of schools within the borough.
Can I just come back very quickly? I think you're absolutely right. This is an amazingly transparent piece of work. You say you're not talking about closures at the moment, but we are. I mean, this isn't we. This is a report that's been put together for us. But I mean, it's now down in black and white in relation to that is one of the things that we'll be considering.
We are. Yeah, sorry, I did say I'm not saying I'm not ruling out schools. The year groups and what we're looking to from forms of entry don't necessarily necessitate a closing of a school. If the trends continue, if the route that we're going, then that would have to be something that we would look at. But the forms of entry and the 16% capacity in the north of the borough does mean that we have got that challenge of overcapacity. And one of the options, and it may come as the most sensible option, is to sort of close the school, but there may be another set of routes that we can do in this sort of the medium term.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Chris. Stephen, Cardinal Vaughan.
Sorry, thank you. Chairman, Andrew Tagg was talking earlier about working with the diocese, but I wonder whether you could perhaps shed more light on the fact that the diocese has its own strategy and it's commissioned its own report, a very detailed one about some of those schools that are listed in the report, and how that might work with this report for the best interests of all schools. I know that the diocese isn't keen on closing schools, but as Andrew Tagg mentioned, there might be other ways of using sites in the short term until the situation changes. And I know there's already plans afoot with the federation between St Charles and St Mary's. So I don't know whether there was any comment really on that, because I think it's more than just working with the diocese. The church, schools and their diocese both have their own plans, and how these might all blend together really.
Yeah, and I think that's a really helpful point, Stephen, and we are keen to this to be seen as one strategy, and we don't want to see different sorts of strategies coming through. So we at the initial stage, we showed the findings of this report, and we would hope that they would all dovetail together. So we were joined up in that sort of direction in the use of buildings. So they'll be really sort of key players in sort of taking this forward, but we see that it is an incredibly strong partnership with not necessarily the local authority leading this. We see every single part of the system playing an equal part in taking it forward with their modelling as well. We're keen to use some of their modelling if it adds value and is different and presents a challenge. So we will have a robust data set that is supported from every sector. So you're not seeing one set of figures produced by one part of the organisation as such, and then a different figure coming from the local authority that will be seamless. And we've got that buy-in from both dioceses now to be part of this.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to add to that point, that the diocesan work is focusing very heavily on the capital, the assets and the estates that the church holds, but the church, or certainly the Catholic Church, can't make a decision to close a school. It has to be the local authority. So that will have to necessitate partnership working anyway. But it's a very good point to raise, Stephen. So thank you very much. Peter, over to you.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say, along with others, how pleased I was to see the strength of this work. The last time I was involved in this sort of stuff was in Ilia days in early 1980s, when they closed the local girls' comprehensive, and that took about 2 years. Are we talking about including consultation and statutory stages, etc. Are we talking about similar timescales at this now, or has it been shortened?
Thank you for the question, Peter. We would want to ensure that if we did go down to needing to close a school, or that was the decision for the strategic view, or use a school in a different sort of purposes, that we would do extensive consultation and ensure that if that timeline required a 2-year process, then that would be the timeline we'd need to put in place. Now, if we're looking at that from this September to move towards a closure of a school, and I'm not saying that will be the position we'll reach, we may see a different sort of approach. We may see a different use of a number of buildings, especially there when we talk around the SEND offer. I can't see that being put in place before September 22. So I think your timelines encompassing a full detailed review and options appraisals coming out of that would definitely fit with those sorts of timescales if we did need to move down to the changing status of a school or closure, or a different temporary change to the use of that building. So it may be mothballing a site for a period of time because we may see some changes. So to move to an ultimate closure of school is a really difficult position to sort of pull back to, and I think that's what we want to be keen to establish, that we may be in a position for temporary closure, temporary capping, different sort of usage, potential usage. You know, we've been quite aspirational with our views around creating SEND provision. We'll come on a little bit later around the pressures around the sort of the high needs block and the development of that local provision and moving away. If we can use sites a little bit more strategically, that may be an option that has a mutual benefit, not only to the sort of the site and the community, but also some of the pressures and supporting and enhancing the delivery of SEND.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Kitty.
Do we have any data on the births in Westminster and Hammersmith and Fulham to give us the information on whether the roles are falling across our boroughs? Because, of course, a lot of children are born outside the borough.
Yeah, we've got a number of data. The pre-birth to 5 sort of pathway and the project has pulled a lot of data. We've definitely got the information from a by borough point of view. We've got the information from Hammersmith and Fulham, but it hasn't been able to be sort of quantified in that sort of level of detail or that level of assurance. It's more publicised data. So we get a lot of the sort of the birth data. I think what we haven't got is the journeys, the sort of a mapping through, and some of the mobility issues that we haven't picked up. But we've definitely got it for Westminster, and I'll talk about the Westminster report. You know, their figures are a lot higher in terms of their vacant places at the moment within Westminster. We are probably 18 months behind the trend with Westminster, with surplus capacity in some of their wards, in addition of 20%.
Thank you, Andrew. Just one final thing from me, Andrew, just to check. In the short term on this, and I'm thinking we're going to look at DSG later, do you think we're going to have to look at the impact on the Falling Roles Fund, and whether or not we need as a forum to relook at the scope of this within the next financial year?
I think it should be entwined into that report around the sort of the falling roles and the decisions that we need to make. I think, as David said earlier, we need to see that sort of the full picture, because in some ways it would be better to have a sort of a longer deficit plan when we're looking at the different use of those resources. And if we are putting money into schools that, as part of that journey to change their sort of status from a different sort of site capping of numbers, we need to reflect that into the falling roles, and don't just take the criteria that we used before to put funding into schools if there isn't going to be that long-term solution. So we need maybe to bring forward if there needs to be any restructures. So they need to balance back, because this all comes out of the funding that's available to all the other schools across the borough. So we need to do any full enrolls allocations from 2021-22 linked to the outcomes and the proposals within this report.
Okay, we're going to look at this in AA, but I suggest that we, in the next meeting, we re-look very closely at Fall Enrolls Fund and how that's going to be allocated and what the criteria for that is. So in terms of the ISOS report, thank you, Andrew, for the detail now. That was excellent, and for steering that report, which gives us a lot to think about, and actually something that we're going to look at over the course of the next couple of years, realistically, at every single forum meeting. So thank you for that. And I ask the committee to note the report. We move on now to A6, which is DSG Budget Monitoring 2021 as of September 2020. And Anita, you're going to take us through this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So you'll see that we started off the year with a DSG of 72,994,000. And within the paper, you will see that we had some adjustments to the early years budgets and the high needs allocations. That means the DSG is increased to 73,275,000. And if we go, so that's shown in table 1. And then if we look at what the forecast position is on the DSG, and I will talk briefly about some of these, but just looking at the summary table 2, on early years, we've got an underspend of 258,000. On the schools block and the central schools block, an underspend of 434. But obviously, rather worryingly, on the high needs block, we've got an overspend of 2 million, which overall shows a forecast overspend of 1,348,000. So if I talk through the main reasons for the variances, well, I won't say too much about them, but on the early years, the main reason for the underspend is the final funding adjustment we got in relation to 2019-20. So we set up an estimate of the final adjustments, and actually we ended up having more funding than we were estimating. So that's the main reason for the underspend on the early years block. On the schools and central schools block, you remember that we were at the last forum, we advised that we've been given some funding from the DFE that counted towards the Grenfell related role reductions. So we've got an underspend there. And also we've got the agreed further contribution to the deficit recovery from the schools block. High needs is covered in another paper, so I won't add anything about that at the moment. So I'm happy to pause and take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Before we get on to the recommendations, are there any questions from members? Jagdeep.
Sorry, Anita, often when we sit in these meetings, you say that we get more or less for the early years block. Is there a reason why it fluctuates?
So on the early years block, we get, so unlike the schools block, which doesn't change once it's set at the beginning of the year, the early years block changes a couple of times during the year, and the last adjustment always happens in the next year. So we always try to do an estimate based on the numbers that we're obviously aware of and have been estimating and have been paying out for, but we don't seem to. At the moment, we don't seem to be doing that well in terms of estimating it particularly accurately, although it's a fairly small percentage change, that net 200,000, but that's the main reason.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jagdeep. Peter.
Yeah, I'm still concerned about this discovery of back years charging on the out of borough top up. We first of all, can you refresh my memory of how much was included for this in last year's accounts? And secondly, are you sure you've got it all now?
So thank you for the question, Peter. I want to cover that on the high needs paper. That does include that information in that paper, so I will come on to that. It's a key point.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Maria.
Yes, just speaking for Chelsea Open Air in particular, early years in general, is there any chance of getting some of this underspend kind of to paid for us in any way? I mean, obviously, every school had great difficulties during the pandemic, during the close down. We never did close. We stayed open all the way through. We had huge additional costs in terms of keeping, having us COVID appropriately resourced, many costs that haven't been refunded. And, we have year on year had to deal with kind of great issues in terms of funding, and certainly we weren't very pleased with the amount that we're getting per pupil. So anyway, it's just a question: is there any chance of any of this? I mean, occasionally in schools forum we're able to vote for some additional funding going to our, primary schools. Is there any chance that any of this could, a small amount would make a huge difference to us, could go to our early years provision?
Can I I'll pass this over to you in a minute, Anita, but just my understanding of this is that given that we're in a position where there is a deficit and a deficit recovery plan in place, that where there's been underspend in the schools block, that money has been used to contribute to the deficit recovery. Is it the case that that's the expectation for transparency here, Anita?
Yes, Andrew. I think, in my view, it would be very difficult to allocate additional funds to the early years sector when, as you say, we've got. So not only did the mainstream schools provide 340,000 as a movement from the schools block to the high needs block, but they're also contributing a further 326,000 as part of the deficit recovery plan. And because the deficit is a lot worse than we had previously anticipated, which I will come on to talk about in the high needs paper, it's not something that I could unfortunately recommend, while I understand the issues that Maria raised.
Yeah, I think council presumably would have major question marks if we were looking at sorting a £6 million deficit, why we were choosing certain areas. But obviously, I will put that back out for further comment from, I think, Maria, and Kitty has a hand up as well. Maria, shall I come back to you?
Right. I mean, I certainly understand that, we are in a deficit position, but we are also paying kind of and not being reimbursed for all of our SEN, which we have a huge amount. And so just recognizing that we know there's a huge problem, but we also know that we're very overstretched financially, and it seems to be getting worse every year. And it's eventually we're not going to be viable, though we still are at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Understand completely the pressures that you're facing there. Kitty, shall I move on to you, because I think you might have a very similar view here.
Well, I was sorry to go back, but in A3, Anita talks about how schools could claim direct from the DFE, but there seemed to be a question over nursery schools. Was there any clarification on that? Just about making, claims for additional expenses. I know we're going back to A3, but it was one of the things Anita mentioned in.
Is this something that might be worth doing offline out of the meeting? Kitty, with Anita, so that she can talk you through the specifics, particularly around recouping COVID costs, which I believe that's what you're talking about here.
Well, yes, and early years was particularly affected because we stayed open during the lockdown to provide for key workers, and it was very expensive because our adult to child ratios and all of the costs were high. So,
I'm happy to contact Kitty outside the meeting and go through that.
Thank you, Anita.
Okay, fantastic. Andrew, you had your hand up and then it went down. You're talking to yourself there, Andrew.
Well, yeah, that's usual. I get on better that way. Just it was sort of addressed, and there's massive pressures across the sector. There has been the announcement that the government will continue to fund the next term 3 and 4 year olds at the pre-COVID level. So that is that support there. And then if Anita can pick up the issue around claiming off from the DFE for additional costs to make the building COVID secure. So that was the only thing I was going to say, and it was picked up in the response.
Thanks, Andrew. David, over to you.
Yeah, it was just to pick up on Kitty's point, which was, I'm sure Kitty is aware, but a lot of primary schools remained open, including those with falling roles and those who are really struggling financially. Jagdeep talked very eloquently at a meeting back in May when we were looking at solutions, and a number of schools, if not all, did approach the DFE for support with funding for their expenses during the sort of the height of the initial part of the pandemic. We certainly I haven't had any communication in response to the letters that I wrote and the very turgid forms that were completed. I don't know if any of my other primary peers did hear back from the DFE. Jagdeep? No.
I think Anita and Andrew, I don't know if it's a separate thing here to update on that. I know that the submissions that were made in through the official channels to the DFE, that I think only one school or a couple of schools in RBKC have been allocated the funding and the rest is being held. Is that right, Anita? And they're reviewing those costs that were requested. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's currently 15 schools that have got a claim in that we're waiting for a final decision from the DFE. What we can see is that those schools that just claimed for their premises costs, their free school meals and additional cleaning, those were all paid out. But schools that included claims for other areas, they're still under review, and we've been told that there may not be an answer until November time. So that's still going to be a while before there's an answer, unfortunately.
Okay, that's useful for consultative though, Anita. We'll feed that back next month when we meet.
Okay, fantastic. Jagdeep, I thought saw you put your hand up there on screen. Was there something you wanted to add?
It's what I do. I touch my face when I'm reassuring myself. But I'm sorry about that.
Maria, have you re-put your hand back up?
Sorry, no, I was in touch privately with Anita about those COVID costs, so okay. I'll speak to her separately. Thank you.
Thank you. I think given the cost pressures and the deficit at this point and the additional COVID funding streams that I think we need to use, I think we need to ensure that the underspend goes towards the reduction, the deficit recovery plan. I think that for the time being is the best protocol, and I think we'll have to come back to that again potentially in the future. So there's one recommendation here, and that is for 4.11. Note the 2021 DSG allocation of 73.275 million and forecast overspend of 1.348 million. This will increase the DSG cumulative deficit to 6.249 by the end of 2021. So I asked the committee to note that report, which then leads us neatly onto A7 and the high needs block forecast, which I believe Anita and Julie are going to run us through. But this came up in June. And I think we had some technical issues on Teams, not only in thanking Simon, but in actually some of the scrutiny around this deficit. So Anita is going to run us through and explain again what happened in terms of the accountancy and some of the issues here, but also run through what the recovery plan is on this. So Anita, you going to start off with the financials?
Yes, I'll start. The paper is going through mainly about the 2 million, just over 2 million forecast overspend in the current year, and therefore what the overall deficit on the DSG of, as Andrew's already referred to, of just over 6 million. We have looked further, done a sort of a great deal of detailed work in relation to the 1920 final position, and if I explain again about the main reason for that that increase at the year end that we hadn't foreseen. So at the end of 1819, we estimated what was due for pupils that are in other boroughs and some in independent schools, independent special schools, and the information that we were using was not robust. It was based on separate spreadsheets of information that wasn't fully up to date. And unfortunately, that meant that we underestimated the cost relating to 2018-19. And the further work that we've done, that cost amounted to an understatement in 1819 of 1,456,000. So that pushed that cost into 1920. We also know that part of the increase was due to additional pupils that we weren't picking up in the forecast. So there were certainly issues with our forecasting methodology. And in order to deal with this, that when we set up the estimates at the end of 1920, we went through with so colleagues from finance working with SEN went through every single child to work out if there were still bills outstanding and to do a much more detailed estimate of costs outstanding rather than before it had been looking at a total position. It did have the schools that pupils were placed at, but it wasn't detailed enough in terms of individual children. And so far, so in the first 6 months, based on the first 6 months, our estimate, and it's included in the forecast, is that we will have to pay an extra 317,000 in relation to 1920 that wasn't included in our estimate. Some of the costs have increased, and where there's been some changes in placement, we hadn't picked up the increases in cost. So we've still got further work to do in terms of making sure that that finance and SEN colleagues working together, that we are getting all of the finance costs onto the new SEN system so that we can run robust reports to pick up all the finances. An awful lot of work on that has been done, but it's not fully complete. So currently within the forecast, it does state that we have got some estimates in there. Some of it's based on the average costs, particularly in out of borough and independent. And so it will change as we work through all of the detail. I also need to mention that we've picked up some additional costs, particularly from Hammersmith and Fulham, where they're now, where on a number of their special schools, they are challenging and saying that we need to put in individual additional support for pupils that are placed in some of their schools. And there has been an increase of Kensington pupils, Kensington and Chelsea pupils that are attending Westminster schools compared to the previous years.
Are they specifically special schools, Anita, in the main?
In the main, yes, there is some mainstream, but it's mainly special schools, yeah.
Okay, so I thought if we just pause there for a second, because that's the first part of the report, and obviously it's extremely concerning to see what we as a forum saw the previous deficit, what it was and what we're working to improve to what it grew to in June. So I think there are some concerns, but if I open this up to members of the forum first, Jagdeep.
So I'm not very quick with my mute. I suppose it has been our policy, hasn't it, to get more children into state provision, and a lot of that state provision is in Hammersmith and Fulham, and therefore it's to be expected that our Hammersmith and Fulham costs would have gone up. But I suppose the differential isn't as great as we were expecting it to be, because they're now doing what we have been doing, in that we're feeding back real costs to other boroughs. Is that right?
I think that we're now being. So how do we tell if it's real costs? So we've been very robust in going back to Hammersmith and Fulham to make sure that they were trying to add on an additional admin costs, even above the 5%. They were trying to add on just some further overhead type costs, and we refused to pay those. But Julie may want to add to this, but we are trying to question every additional support cost that is made by Hammersmith and Fulham schools.
Anita, linked to that, just and further on in the paper, and one of the recommendations would having the provision at Barby and the provision at Golborne and Maxilla make a difference in the future on some of those cost pressures.
Yes, it will do. Although one of the other key points in the paper is the increase in the number of EHCPs. So we are expecting, so across London there's an estimated projection of a 10% increase over the next 5 years, and we're expecting by the end of March 2020 to have a 15% increase. So some of it will be about avoiding future increases in costs rather than reducing the costs that are there already, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. Peter.
Can I just add also, because yes, Bulby and the new special school will be part of our managing cost pressures, but the one of the biggest areas that we're experiencing a cost pressure is for 20 to 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
So neither of those are going to help us address that bit of it.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think we'll possibly come on to that, because I think there may be questions around that specific area. Peter, do you have a question in regards to the finance? You're on mute there, Peter.
I was horrified to see the figure. I mean, are you sure, Anita, you've got the right number of competent people on it to sort it out, so that we get a quick resolution of the issues? And secondly, I was interested that Hammersmith were trying to sort of load costs on us. Do you think our charge out to other boroughs for what we do is fully fair and up to date? Are we recouping as much as we can from other boroughs?
So I think in terms of what schools recoup from other boroughs, it's in line with the agreed items that you can charge. The difference is that Hammersmith and Fulham is mainly about the special schools. So, and obviously we don't have a special school that we're currently charging out for.
Oh, right, okay.
And in terms of, both Julie and I have got competent people working on this. I think the problem is at the moment that there is a lot of other pressures in relation to responding to COVID-19 and other cost pressure areas. So it's not, so the detailed work is not being done we're not. We've done a hell of a lot of work, but we probably want to be further ahead than we are. But so the figures will still change as that full detailed work. But the people doing it, I have full confidence in.
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we need to see as Forum is just a real firm line on this and assurances from officers that the plan that comes to the next meeting indicates exactly where savings are going to be made, because the scale in which this has grown is almost exponential. And we were worried about it when it was sort of down at 2 million, and we're up at a lot more than that now. So I think we will need to scrutinise the plan heavily in January. Chris, over to you.
Yes, I mean, I'm pleased to hear that you're going back to Hammersmith and Fulham and unpicking that, because that certainly sounds extraordinary. One of the things I was wondering about, 4.5, we're talking about supporting pupils in local schools offers better value for money. And then you go on to say, continue to develop low-cost specialist provision in local schools. Is there some sort of strategy around that, or is it piecemeal? I mean, because that is clearly a way forward to reducing costs. Is that something that has a plan around it, an action plan?
Yes, I'll let Julie respond to that, I think.
Yeah, thank you. We do have a commissioning plan, which goes in detail through the children with the HCPs, analyses them by gender, by age, by need type. We've used that to help us build a forecast of where we think we'll be over the next 4 or 5 years, and have then identified where is it that we need new provision. We shared a version of that commissioning plan with the High Needs Block Reference Group that has been established by this forum last week. And one of the recommendations from that working group is that the paper needs to be shared by with all of the head teachers. So there is a plan to bring the paper to the head teachers briefing on Tuesday to begin to start the conversation, and it does identify a number of areas where we need to develop new provision, because we have a gap at the moment. And what the paper does highlight is 40% of our children with EHCPs are travelling outside of the borough currently in order to access their specialist provision. So there is a very clear commissioning strategy.
Thank you. Just in relation to this huge figure, there's a short-term plan, but one wouldn't want to lose the developmental things that need to be going on in order to achieve sort of medium and long-term plans. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to hand over to Andrew for comment, and then I think it would be prudent then to move on to Julie's part of the report, so she can talk through some of the pressures that are coming up, because I think that's got to be the next focus for actually the reduction. So, Andrew, over to you first.
Just a quick couple of comments, really, that we've done a forensic review, and we continue to do a forensic review, pupil-based monitoring, bringing together Anita and Julie's team to ensure that we've got those forecasts accurately. In terms of Hammersmith and Fulham and other providers, we use this as part of benchmarking data. So we do benchmarking from across London to challenge what providers are paying for different sorts of support. I don't want it sort of portrayed in any way that Hammersmith and Fulham are being really sort of creative and pushing the sort of the boundaries that they are doing. They're just looking at their costs as well and sort of attributing, but we push back very robustly in terms of our sort of benchmarking information. And the last point that really is useful to make, whilst the deficit is large and is sort of a growing piece, and the different sort of change was quite a shock across the country. We're probably seeing now an overspend in high needs funding around about £1 billion across the local authorities that are coming through. So it is really a challenge that we're not just facing within this borough. And I think just before we come on to Julie's paper, the growth up to the age of 25 has not been matched with increasing levels of funding. So in some ways, to stand still will be an achievement whilst we continue to look at more local solutions, challenging the sort of the deficit and looking at different ways of delivering SEND across the borough.
Thanks, Andrew. Julie, over to you, and then Stephen's had his hand up for a while, so we'll just let Julie run through her part of the report, and then we'll try and capture everything in the round. Julie.
Thank you, Andrew. Can I just pick up something that Andrew Tagg just mentioned? Anita and I met with the DFE and the SFA, and they completely echoed the point that Andrew Tagg had just made about the forensic analysis that we'd done, the work of the High Needs Block Reference Group throughout last year, and said, you know, that actually what we've managed to do is contain the pressure at this level because of the changes that we've already made. So if I can just draw your attention to a few paragraphs in the report that sort of drill down into where is the pressure. And so at paragraph 4.1, you'll see there's a bar graph that highlights the age profile of those very complex children, young people with education, health and care plans. And it shows the number who are aged 20 to 25. Now, bearing in mind that the statutory changes came in force in September 14, we are just starting to see the real pressure of the extension of the legal age range from 19 to 25 in terms of the number of children, young people who are in that 20 to 25 bracket. And the point I want to make is, you know, we have double the number of young people with plans at that age category than in Westminster, where there is double the population of that age group. And then moving down to the bar graph in 4.2, you'll see the year group analysis, and what's particularly noticeable is that peak in year 16. This is 2 years after young people will have left a special school, the upper age limit for a special school, and yet we are still making very expensive specialist provision for that year group. I want to come back to some of the work that we did during 2019, because through the reference group we did look at, you know, a more effective way of targeting the top up to our in-borough children in our mainstream schools to ensure schools with the most complex children receive sufficient resource to be able to do that. And we agreed a 3-year approach to rolling out the top-up funding. And we started that in January 20. So we are beginning to see a shift towards funding children with the same needs in different parts of the borough, receiving high funding if they've got high needs and lower funding if they've got lower needs. We're looking at our commissioning intentions to make sure that we're creating capacity in borough where possible. And the work of the review group, we've narrowed down 3 particular areas that we really need to focus as we move forward through this academic year. That being the cost of the independent sector placements that we make, the independent fees, the cost of the top-ups and the kind of loss of economies of scale when we're using other borough maintained specialist provision, and those top-ups and the rollout of our banding tool. We've talked about the fact that we're opening our own special school, and we're anticipating that will begin to admit children next September, and that we'll start with about 40 of the 80 places being filled. And we're currently working through which children will be appropriate to move across. And it would be great if some of the families with children currently being educated in the independent sector want to take up the offer we're making of a local special school. And the final part I want to come on to in paragraph 5.1 is, you know, there will be some startup costs, some startup funding is going to be needed to make sure that the new school is ready to go. And one of the recommendations in this report is to agree the startup funding so that we can get on with appointing the head teacher and really start to take forward the work of being able to offer places and get the admissions rolling. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Stephen, over to you.
Sorry, I think my question might have actually been answered a bit of that. I suppose my question was about the increasing number, and I saw from the bar chart and from our experience that we're seeing more and more children coming in from other authorities. I think we have 8 different authorities this year. 8% of our intake came in with EHCPs, which is exceptionally high. And I don't know whether the borough can help advise. You talked about benchmarking that you've done with other authorities. It might be useful because we see that different authorities approach funding in very different ways. There's always an argument about the level of support. It always seems to be as low as possibly can be, and then you gather the actual needs of these children when they come in, and realise that actually they're extremely high in many cases. Is there any advice that the local authority can do to help with this ever increasing number of children coming into schools?
We're certainly committed to doing some benchmarking data, reporting that back to the high needs review group so that we can have a look at how our costs compare. I think what you're seeing is a reflection of a deficit of specialist provision, particularly for children with autism, and a number of the neighbouring authorities are also developing new specialist provision. The head teacher of Queensmill is on this call, and I don't know if he wants to comment on the number of local authorities that are currently using the school, but I expect that they get multiple applications for every possible vacancy that they have, because the number of children being identified with autism has been growing significantly. So
I have several already work with them actually.
So there is a pressure there. It is our most prevalent need type, and all of our data is telling us that in terms of developing provision, we've really got to focus on supporting every mainstream school to be able to meet the needs of children with autism, because the answer is not to send everybody to special, because that would be very, very expensive.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Julie. Stephen, was there something else there?
Yeah, I think it's just the diversity, really. You can't specialise, you can't concentrate if every child comes in with very, very different needs. You talked earlier about schools getting trained to specialise in one particular area. I think last year we lost the funding for our post-16 children because they were going or it had been allocated to Kensington Aldridge. But actually our numbers this year are as high. In fact, they're higher than ever. So there is a mismatch in planning and what's actually happening in practice. And maybe that's a conversation for another time actually. But yeah, the EHCPs, they're coming in with such a wide variety. It will be good when the new school is up and running and that we have a specialist unit that we can concentrate different schools on different things, I suppose.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Andrew, over to you. You've got your hand raised.
Sorry, that's an old hand.
Again?
Yeah, sorry, it's an old hand. I forgot to put it down. Apologies.
Okay, so we, in terms of the recommendations and the actions here, 7.11, to note the high needs block forecast DSG cumulative deficit position and to revise summary DSG deficit recovery plan position. I don't think we can miss that. 7.1.2, note the future arrangements for monitoring the high needs block spend, including the new HMB reference group, to agree the payment of £150,000 from the high needs block of the DSG as the start-up cost for the new special school, and to note that a detailed DSG deficit recovery plan with the impact of action taken to date, clearly identified, will be provided at the next school forum meeting. And I think that last point is really important. Whilst there's no silver bullet to solve SEN funding, it's a national problem. Recognising the work that Julie and Anita have done with the HMB group. But I do think in that recovery plan, we need to see what work is happening internally, Anita, in your team, in tightening up those systems around identifying children with EHC plans, so we don't end up in that same position that we faced coming out in June as a bit of a bombshell. So I asked the committee to note that report from Anita and Julie. Right, on to...
Sorry, Andrew, there is the one decision about the 150,000.
Apologies. The decision in regards to £150,000 from the High Needs block as the start-up cost for the new special school. Hands up if we agree to that. Okay, that seems unanimous with video hands and virtual hands. So, yeah, that can be actioned. On to A8, which is the DSG and the National Funding Formula and Local Funding Formula review. Anita, you're going to take us through this.
Yes, so in July we got the indicative allocations for 3 of the DSG blocks, including the schools block, which is key here. And the biggest change to the funding, which I'm sure you've probably all picked up, is that the funding that was in the separate teachers' pay and the pension employers' contribution grant has been moved into the DSG from April 2021. So that will be allocated via the formula, and just in relation to that bit, we do have to allocate it via the ORPU. So I know we'll come on to talk about potential different models, but whatever model is chosen, this element will be funded through the ORPU.
Anita, can I just get you to clarify that the current percentage of that, will that cover the current pay awards in 2021?
Yeah, thank you for raising that, Andrew. At the moment, the funding that's been added in is based on the 2021 academic year. No, the 1920 academic year. So it doesn't include the pay award from this September, and we're very aware of that. And I mean, I can't believe that funding wouldn't be added into the DSG, but clearly we're keeping a very tight eye and raising the issue to make sure that that funding does come into the DSG. But I mean, there'd be a national outcry if that funding wasn't added in to fund the pay award from September. But that's not yet in these figures.
Okay. In terms of, is it prudent now just to go on to, I know Amanda's got a hand up, to talk about the models that have been put forward here to forum, Anita?
Yes, certainly.
I think this is every head teacher's favourite part of forum, to be honest. So can I just clarify something in the titles of the that we've got on the 2 models? We've got option 1 and option 2. Option 1 says LA formula no change. Option 2 says LA halfway, LA stroke NFF. Anita, am I right in saying that the LA formula is what we adopted for 2021, which was a movement towards LA NFF, and option 2 is just a further movement towards NFF? Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. And I realise it's not clear on that appendix, so thanks for raising that. Yeah, absolutely. The current formula was where we moved halfway from the previous Kensington and Chelsea formula back in 1819 to the National Funding Formula values. So that was already a halfway move. And then the other option that's provided, as Andrew says, is moving again halfway from where we currently are to the full National Funding Formula values.
Okay, thanks, Anita. So just before I put this out here, I think as forum members, we, rather than looking at our own schools, we have to look across the piece and the impact on absolutely everybody. But I do think, in light of Andrew Tagg's report at the start of this meeting, that we're facing huge challenges, particularly in the primary sector, particularly smaller schools that are single form or 2 form entry, and that there is a clear option 2 provides support to the more vulnerable schools, which I think as a forum we need to, going forward, certainly be mindful of. But I'm going to put this out now to colleagues on the forum. Amanda.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to echo what you said there. I mean, obviously, All Saints would be better off under option 1. However, I think it's absolutely incumbent on this community to act as one and to support those most vulnerable at this time, because after all, without that support for effectively our feeder schools in the future, they won't be around. And I think now is the time to really start our strategy of support.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. David, over to you.
Thanks for that. Amanda Heads will be very appreciative of that emphatic support. Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it earlier, Andrew. We live in very unique times, and I'm not referring there to the pandemic, although I do think that going forward that may well have a negative impact on lots of different factors in regard to finances. But, we're in a situation at the moment that is not unique, I'm sure, but is debilitating. And it would be, coming at this, trying to be impartial and trying to look at what is in the best interest of those schools that are struggling with finances and falling roles. It's academic, really. So I'll echo everything that Amanda said and everything you said earlier. And, certainly as the representative for community schools, I'd like to be able to go back to consultative and to say, with a very loud, clear voice and single-minded conviction that Forum is supportive of supporting those schools in particular.
Yeah, thank you, David. Jagdeep, over to you.
So I'm just looking at the columns, Anita, and I just want to clarify really clearly. In Appendix A, you've got 3 columns there. They're all the current existing grants, aren't they? For this teachers, for the pensions, the employee costs, etc. Yeah. So on average, if you look, I'm going to pick a school I don't lead. So Oxford Gardens, I picked out for just an example. There, if you went for option 2, that it's about 120,000 they would have received in grants usually. And then if you go for option 1, they would actually see 9,000 less than they would have got in the grants in this current financial year. So therefore, an actual cut, in relative terms.
Right.
Not.
The third column is the total. The 65 is the total.
The third column is the total. Right.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, no.
I was putting all 3 together, and now I was getting to the end. I was thinking, wow. That's really helpful. Thank you. So there's more than a 2% increase in there for all schools, essentially, on either option. Yeah.
It is. So when you look at it in total, it's once you take the teachers' pay, those pay grants out, it is about 2% overall increase.
Yeah, because that's I saw those indicative figures that came out on the DfE website some months ago, which was helpful. Quite unusual for them to put those out. That's really clear, and actually that does mean that, obviously as primary schools would be quite stupid not to pick option 2, I think that the broadest shoulders can take it. At this stage, we'd take that. Thank you.
Can I propose a way forward on this? That option 2 is clearly, so far from the voices we've heard, that the clear favourite for various just sensible and reasons, but that we have to make a decision by January the 24th. Next forum is on the 18th of January. So we note that option 2 is the present favourite and the current wish of forum, but that for the next meeting we have another column or 2 columns, Anita, with actually not just option 1, option 2, but also the NFF and the hard NFF, see what they look like across all schools, so that we can make a final decision before we have to submit this to DfE so that we're fully furnished with all of the information, and we have the full evidence before we make that final decision. Does that sound like a sensible plan to members? Anita, does that make sense to both yourself and Andrew from your positions at the LA?
Yes, as you say, we have to submit by the 21st of January, so we would just about have time with the forum. But actually, I think because when we did these models, we could only model it on the 1920 data, and it's the minimum funding guarantee, not including the pay awards. Actually, I think that would probably be quite a wise thing to do for the forum.
Yeah. I also think that given we're about to hit an autumn term, that we don't know what's going to happen, and what's going to happen particularly to the more vulnerable schools, we might be in a better place to make decisions such as that in January. Maria, you've got your hand up.
Sorry.
So I was with the last proposal. I'll put it down now.
Okay. All right, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, just for my part, that makes perfect sense. We may see some big changes. I think it's really reassuring that we've got a unanimous review from the Schools Forum tonight to that direction of travel. But I think we just retain that flexibility to react to any other changes if we do see the full allocation of those grants not coming through, or there is some sort of changes in local circumstances. But, you know, we've got that sort of clear direction. I think it's good that we can take that back to the executive, that there is that support for those smaller schools, just with that remaining view, just to give us that in those sort of the 6 days, and we can be really clear that that's unlikely to be challenged.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anita, for the report. If I just run through the recommendation. So 7.1.1 is going to, oh, sorry, Stephen, you've just jumped in there with your hand up. Stephen.
Sorry, can I just confirm, because I'm trying to add the figures up in front of me, which is always a terrible idea. So that's a £900,000 shift from secondary to primaries. Is that right? Or have I misread it?
That would, yes, shift money from secondaries to primary. Yes, that's correct.
With the lowest school losing 50,000 and the biggest one being nearly 350,000. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll be re-looking at this then in January. And if we look at, so 7.1.1 was about agreeing the two options. We have a direction of travel now to move towards option 2 with view that we'll have more information in January. So that's where we'll go. 7.1.2 to confirm the agreement to transfer £340,000 from the schools block to the high needs block as part of the deficit recovery plan agreed at the last schools forum on the 12th of June. So this was already agreed, but it's just confirming that agreement. Are we happy with that, forum members? Yeah, great, thank you. I'm getting a majority nods of head there. To review updated figures after information has been received from the SFA, but before 21st of January for the statutory deadline for APT submission. We've just agreed to that with the direction of travel there. And note the proposal will be brought to the next meeting of the Schools Forum regarding growth funding and following those criteria funding, which we've mentioned in previously in Andrew's ISOS report as well as something that we need to look at those numbers. Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to the scheme for financing schools, everybody's favourite agenda item because it seems to come up every single time. Anita, I'll hand over to you, but what I do know is that this has been gone over a number of times. It's in line with, it's mainly DfE recommendations, and if memory serves me correctly, you've withdrawn the cash advances for schools, and the monthly It was the monthly reporting, particularly for the primary schools. You went back on that. Have I summarised that correctly?
Only that we didn't remove the cash advances for schools, but we did remove the proposal that we went to quarterly rather than termly. So we didn't make any change to the timing of the cash advances, absolutely, and we didn't bring forward the date for financial returns from schools. As you say, Andrew, it's largely directed revisions from the DFE. We're just adding some further schools to the approved banks because that the banks that schools want to use, and we should keep in line with that. And also, it's a minor change to the insurance arrangements in line with the recommendations from the DFE. So it's very minor, but we have to go through, as you say, it tends to come so often. We have to go through this consultation, get agreement from the forum to consult with all schools, then come back again. But really, there's nothing. Well, in my view, others may think there's nothing substantial here in the changes. They're very minor.
Okay, I'll run through them in a minute. They're all highlighted in the report, which we should have looked at. Stephen, you've got your hand up. Did you have a query on this one?
Sorry, no, I should have dropped my hand earlier. Sorry.
No problem. So recommendations in 4.1 is just to note the updated provisions in the policy as outlined in the report, to review and approve the policies to be consulted on with all maintained schools in line with provision 1.4 of the policy, and to agree to the policies being placed on the agenda for the next schools forum meeting so that consultation response can be reviewed and the final policy approved. So we'll look forward to seeing that again. And I asked the committee to note that report. Moving on to A10, any other items of business? I have one. Amanda?
You're on mute.
Sorry, didn't we have to agree to the final element of it?
Thank you. Agree. Well, it's agreeing to the policies being placed on the agenda for the next schools forum meeting. So I hope we've got agreement for that. All right, thank you, everybody. A10, any other items of business from forum members? Okay, fantastic. Just one from me. At the beginning, because her name wasn't on the agenda as a member of the forum, I didn't mention Mariella Ardron, who is the also a member representing Chelsea Academy. I believe she's had to go, but also we just note the welcome to Mariella joining the forum and welcome to RBKC. So that concludes this meeting of the Schools Forum, and I look forward to seeing you all on the 18th of January. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.